There we go. All right. Welcome to the Pitwall Panic podcast. This week it seems to be just me. SJ is not here this week, and Alan will not be with us this week. Stuff came up, and they are not here. They may or may not show up partway through. I'm not 100% sure on that. But it's a possibility. That being said, let's go ahead and get into this week's stuff. If you're not already, please follow us on TikTok, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Twitch, and subscribe on YouTube. And you're more than welcome to join the Discord where we talk about the races, generally speaking, as they happen. We have a racing spoilers channel, so if you don't watch the race as it happens, you don't have to see the conversation. But if you want to talk about it while it's going on, we have a channel to talk about it mid-race. And then we just talk F1 stuff throughout the week. That being said, this week was interesting and not interesting all at the same time as far as leading up to the race. I kind of expected some of the issues we had in the race, and if you watched last week's episode, you would have seen some of the stuff that I pointed out as far as it doesn't really surprise me that we had the issues that we had, like with Max and Bortoletto using the rear end of the car. I kind of expected that to happen, and I called that to happen last week. But before we get into that, let's kind of talk about some of this news that happened this week. This week we had Max Verstappen, who has committed to being there in 2027 with Red Bull. I believe it's just through 2027, but Sainz has finally signed with somebody, and that being he's staying with Williams. And then Alex Albon has agreed to stay at Williams. And I believe Fernando Alonso also said he's going to stay at Aston Martin. So nobody's really moving. Silly season this year has been very boring, to be blunt about it. There's just nothing has happened this season. On the other hand, we have the news that Isaac Hadjar fractured his wrist, giving Yuki Tsunoda a chance to drive this weekend. And I think that given the opportunity, he did the best he could with that opportunity. And I say that to say we'll dig further into that and my thought process on this later in the episode. I really think that this was pivotal for his chances to potentially end up on the grid time starting next year. Other news this week. Let me see. It was kind of just a slow week. Like I said, I think the stuff with Isaac Hadjar is just a simple wrist fracture and not a full break. They're expecting him to be back by Monza, supposedly. Now, my question for that is that Red Bull just saying we'll have him back by Monza, or will they actually have him back by Monza? If we look at the schedule, the Monza race will be September 4th through the 6th. So that's not this upcoming weekend, but it's the weekend after that. So is it possible? I guess it kind of depends on when he fractured his wrist, on if he could possibly make it back in time for Monza. I don't know, though. Bones don't typically heal that fast, and the amount of pressure that is put on your wrist to drive these cars, even if he says he can drive the car, I don't know that I would let him. Monza is a very high-speed track, which means when you're going to the corners, you're pulling higher Gs, which means it's harder to fight the wheel, and you risk making his wrist worse. So I don't know that it'd be the wisest thing to do. Now, if he broke it or fractured it week 1 of the or the mid-season break, maybe it's healed enough. Because let's see, that's like 3 weeks. Then you take this week, that's 4 weeks. Next week off is 5 weeks. And then if he goes through the whole week the following week, that's 6 weeks, depending on when he fractured it. I mean, maybe. But I don't know that I would risk it. And I might just let the situation we had today go on Liam Lawson did not look bad in that Red Bull, so I don't think they need to rush to bring Isaac Hadjar back. Let him heal so that when he comes back, he doesn't get worse and end up being out longer. Um, I think that Yuki did phenomenally in the V carb, so you don't have to worry about, well, we're losing a driver down there. So I just feel that it is best that they let Isaac Hadjar properly heal. I mean, they're not talking surgery, so I don't think he's going to be out that long, but you don't want to make it worse. You don't want him to try to push through the pain, get in an accident, and then he's set back even longer. It wouldn't be the first time we saw something like that, and I feel like you have to protect a young talent like Isaac Hadjar because he's more likely to say, yeah, I'm good, when he's really not. I don't know if that necessarily makes sense to everybody. It's just many people, especially when you look at the way Red Bull treats their drivers, are not going to want to be out, even for an injury, because your time is limited. And you can become very forgettable very fast. And Red Bull has this idea that they'll go through junior drivers like it's nothing. And they're already talking about the kid, I cannot pronounce his name, Solvo, talking about bringing him in to B carb supposedly. They're talking about he's the next one up. So if you're Hadjar, you might be worried about that. So I just don't think you can allow Hadjar to make that decision. You have to put him through some strenuous testing to make sure his wrist will hold up. That's just my opinion. Now, some other news from this weekend while we're in the vein of Red Bull. Yuki talked about, last minute getting called up. He was like on the beach, I think in Greece, when he got called saying, hey, Hadjar's not going to race. We need you to come in. And over the weekend, he did in Zandvoort. Let's see, today's Sunday, so Friday, he made a comment that it feels like a rookie driving these cars in Zandvoort. A lot of the drivers have talked about how difficult it has been to adjust to this car. And we're 12 races into the season and they're still struggling. Yuki came in and had one practice session and then went straight into sprint qualifying, then a sprint race, then qualifying, then a Grand Prix race. And that's all the time he had. He had one practice session to really get this feel for this car under him. Yes, he's a test driver for Red Bull, which means that yes, he has been helping develop the car. But developing and testing the car is a lot different than driving it on the absolute edge and pushing to try to pass people and outqualify people and all these other things. And I feel like Yuki did phenomenal when you look at the lack of time he's had in the seat on the track during race conditions. He ended up just barely out of the points. He took P11. And admitting that he feels like a rookie and you take P11. I think that, we saw earlier this season that Haas has been talking to Yuki. And we saw how terrible Ocon did yet again today. At some point, I feel like you're better off just pulling Ocon and throwing Jack Doohan in the car and giving him a shot, because what do you have to lose at that point? Ocon's not coming near the points anyways. So, what's the worst case scenario? You don't score points? What's different? I think Ocon is definitely 100% done. It's just a matter of who. The Kamara that they were talking to that comes from the Red Bull Junior, or not Red Bull, he comes from Ferrari's junior program. Is supposedly talking to Cadillac, so could Haas be slipping away from him? Possibly. You have somebody now in Yuki Tsunoda that has been tested in actual race conditions and did really well. I think they'd be very stupid to pass up on Yuki. What other driver do you know of that could be thrown in the mix of a new regulation that nobody else really understands yet? Drivers that have been 12 races into the new regulation are still struggling with, and did the way Yuki did. Finishing 11th out of 22 drivers. He did better than half the field. Granted, Max DNF, that would have been somebody that would have beat him. But I mean, it's not like Fernando Alonso's Monaco to where half the grid had a DNF or take a penalty, a 5-second penalty for him to get in the points. He did what he needed to do, and I feel like he has earned a spot on the grid. Now, I could be completely wrong, and people might disagree with that, but I don't know where all the Yuki hate comes from. I know people will say, well, he never did anything. When you look at what Yuki did at B-Carb and AlphaTauri, the only teammate he ever had that beat him was Pierre Gasly, who now leads the Alpine team. Other than that, the only other teammate that beat him was Max Verstappen. They brought in De Vries, and De Vries did all this, oh, I'll beat him because I've been a champion here and here and here. And then he got dog walked by Yuki. They brought in Daniel Ricciardo, and everybody said, oh, Ricciardo is just going to be so much better. And then Yuki dog walked him. They brought in Lawson, and the little bit that Yuki drove with Lawson, he did better than Lawson. He did better than Hadjar for the little bit that he did there. I don't understand and don't know what Yuki needs to do for people to give him another chance and stop all this hate that's unnecessary and just, quite frankly, false. It's kind of like the Colapinto hate at this point. Colapinto hate is so forced at this point. And I say that because you have people that want to say, oh, all he does is crash. All he does is drive the car bad. Go look at the point standings. He's in 12th place right now and only like 4 points out of 11th. So if he's that bad, how is everybody else below him? I understand the cars aren't necessarily the greatest, but the Alpine's not exactly Ferrari. It's not exactly this supercar on the grid compared to everybody else. It still fights. I mean, Haas can still fight with it. V-Carbs can still fight with it. And Colapinto is regularly doing better than their drivers. I don't understand the hate there either. I think that F1 fans need to take a step back and stop being so daggum toxic. I don't understand why it's so toxic right now. And it's unnecessary. All it's going to do is make things worse in the sport, I feel like. Because now we're starting to see drivers get in these different threats and whatnot, and it just shouldn't be happening. Now, as far as the rest of the weekend goes, we saw qualifying. I feel like qualifying was pretty much what we kind of expected. Lando kind of surprised some people by taking pole in both. But I feel like the sprint, or he didn't take pole in sprint qualifying, did he? No, George took it in that. But I mean, when we look at the sprint, it wasn't really that exciting in my opinion. It was a good race, don't get me wrong. But nothing really crazy happened. You had Charles that went from like, I think 4th to 2nd? Or 5th to 2nd? He went 3rd to 2nd. So, I mean, even then, that's not something crazy. I mean, there was like one overtake the whole entire sprint that was like actually worth something that mattered that I can really tell. I don't think Kimi really moved up that much. Yeah, okay, so Charles and Kimi both had overtakes. Last week, you know, if we start looking in now, if we look forward to the qualifying, the consistency here with Red Bull is crazy. So Max took 6th in sprint quali and 7th in regular quali, and then we know first lap he loses a car, ends up in the wall. And this is kind of an interesting situation for Max. I mean, he was complaining about the car and the whole weekend as a whole. He said the whole weekend was very disappointing. Obviously, wrecking the car was disappointing. I think it says a lot about Max and the fact that he did not blame anybody but himself for the accident. He feels that he could have avoided the accident, still ended up in the wall. And it really sucks that he went out the way he did for the last Netherlands race for the foreseeable future. Nobody knows when this track will come back, if it does come back in F1. And we don't know if Max will still be on the grid when it does come back, if it does come back. So this could have very well been the last chance for Netherlands people to see Max in F1 as far as at that track. So it sucks to see him go out the way he did on the first lap. But I think Liam Lawson stepped up and did the best that he could in that Red Bull. In qualifying, he finished right behind Max, and then he finished the race in 7th place. So, if Max is still there, Liam finishes 8th, but he finished 7th. So I think this should really help Liam as far as potentially if something happens to Max leaving or whatever. Liam, I think, is the next one up. I know a lot of people were thinking Lindblad. I think this weekend should give Liam Lawson some more faith in himself, and it will help him with his driving at VCarb. And here's the reason why I say that. Everybody knows that Red Bull is very quick to throw a driver out, and they're not very often going to give you a second chance. But they did give Liam a second chance, and that might be the fact that Christian Horner is gone and Becky's is in as team principal now. They give Liam Lawson a second chance, and he took the best he could with that chance. If you think back to last year, there was not a single race when he was, I know it was only 2 races, 3 if you count the sprint in, I think, China, that Liam Lawson, he finished last place every single time, and this time he finished 7th place in the race. The fact that they called him instead of Lindblad or Yuki to drive in that second seat says a lot for Liam. They have faith in Liam. If an opportunity comes, I think he's the next one up. That should let him not force himself to drive a certain way in that VCarb. He can continue to be comfortable and relaxed and drive the way he can, the way he has shown that he can. I think when he was at Red Bull, he was putting too much pressure on himself, and that created the issues that he was having, and he was making mistakes that we had not seen out of him before. So I think this is very good for his career. I think Lindblad had an opportunity also to potentially learn from somebody like Yuki. Granted, Yuki was talking about he felt like a rookie, but if you let somebody come in who has not driven this car at all, you have 12 races under you, which makes you the veteran driver of this regulation and this team, and you get beat by the said person, being Yuki. Yuki is not the kind to keep information to himself. He is very much so helps the team and wants to help in any way he can to Red Bull and VCarb. And I'm willing to bet he'll give Lindblad some advice if he'll listen to it. That being said, it's up to him to take it. I think Lindblad right now is going to be very much so a sponge in the sense of he's going to try to learn any way he can. Crazy stuff from this weekend. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 5 more DNFs, which is, at what point are we going to have a race this season that something crazy does not happen and we have a DNF? At what point in the season are we not going to have some kind of failure with the cars that causes a DNF? And, we'll take Max out of this. We'll take Albon out of this because both of those are caused by accidents. We'll take Bottas out of this because it's Cadillac, so it's a brand new team. They're still trying to figure out their issues. But Haas, yet again, had 2 DNFs due to, I'm guessing, engine failure. I haven't really looked into why. But we have 2 more DNFs there. And then we have Lance Stroll DNF with Aston Martin. That's 3 DNFs due to car failures. At what point in this cycle are we going to stop having DNFs due to failures? It's kind of out of hand. We're 13 races in, and every single race we've had DNFs. And they think this is good for the sport. Are they just delusional? Do they not care? What does it have to happen? I guess in all reality, we're making steps in the right direction since we're changing some of this going into 27 in the power split regulation. And then in 28, it's changing even further. And then supposedly, we have the conversation going on with the president of the FIA wanting to make F1 back to completely 100% combustion engine instead of split with any kind of split on energy. And I think that's kind of a direction we have to go in F1. I think a lot of the fan base is tired of this energy. It makes racing very different and not in a good way. Because you can just kind of press this button and here's this boost to get around whoever you're trying to get around. And oops, I used too much. Now I can't defend. And it's a weird time for racing. I'm not saying that it's the worst thing in the world, but I think that we have became too the batteries become it just needs to go. It's too unreliable, it's too unpredictable. It makes some of the racing unrealistic and logical because if you use too much battery, you can't defend, so what's the point? I'm ready for them to get away from this battery. Now, some things that were awesome from this weekend. Obviously, Yuki going P11. No, he wasn't in the points, but he's shown he still has a right to be on the grid. Imagine if he has 5 weekends to race, to get a feeling for this car. Where does he end up? Fernando Alonso, finally in the points, takes 9th place. Nico Hulkenberg, finally in the points, I think for the second time this season, in 8th place. Liam Lawson in 7th place, showing he can hang in the Red Bull. Lando won the race, which is awesome because it breaks up the Kimi Antonelli show. George is back on the podium, which is awesome because it was starting to feel like George was just kind of out there and getting whatever points he can scrap up to find for Mercedes. We see Lewis and Charles there together, so it was not a runaway train from one driver or the other, and I think that's really important for Ferrari, that they're building this car in a way that both drivers can drive it. If they want to win this championship, that's what they need, but they also need to get out of their own way. Their strategic timing and their strategic plans suck, quite frankly, and they have got to get out of their own way to make this thing happen. But I do think there's still a chance, and I think Lewis, if anybody's going to win the title other than Kimi, it's going to be Lewis. I don't think Lando's going to be able to pull the 100-point gap like Max did last year. I don't think Max is going to be able to pull the gap. When we look at the standings right now, driver standings, Max is at 112 points, Kimi's at 242. So he's 130 points back. Yes, he almost pulled off 120 points, but he did not pull off 120 points. He was 2 points shy. Now we're talking 130 points. I don't see it happening. I explained last week, this is not like last year. We're not splitting the points between 2 drivers every single weekend. It's just not happening. It's mostly Kimi winning. I know that Lando won the last 2 races, but for majority of the season, it's been Kimi winning. So there's nobody to take points away from him. We got George and Lewis tied at 183, which I think is awesome because now we have a battle going for second place, which even if Kimi runs away with it, that makes it exciting. We have Lando, who's won back-to-back races now, which makes it exciting, gives you something to cheer for. The question becomes, is that McLaren just better on low-speed tracks? I think next race at Monza will show us really where the McLaren's at. If it's still this strong at Monza, then maybe, just maybe, you can say, well, Lando might have a shot. Now, it would take, I think we did the math in the Discord. It was something like Kimi has to DNF one race and take second place every other race, and Lando has to win out to have the opportunity, or something crazy. But mathematically, he would still have a shot. I just don't know. He has to look really good in Monza for me to believe that. And I just don't know. Now, if he can be strong there and then we go to Baku, which is another slow speed track, it could get very, very, very interesting this season, the second half. Oscar needs to figure out his car for McLaren, but if he figures out how to drive this car and we look at teams, McLaren's sitting in third place with 263 points and Ferrari's at 338. We might see McLaren try to make a move up. Not saying it's possible, not saying it'll happen. It's going to take Oscar doing better than P7, I can tell you that much. Where did he finish today? He finished P6 today. So he needs to get better and more consistent. But we can see McLaren try to to a mode to shake it up, and that might be what becomes Mercedes' saving grace. Because right now, as long as Ferrari doesn't have issues like today where Lewis is trying to get around Charles doesn't want to move out of the way, and then we get back to later in the race, and Charles is now fighting with Lewis. We've had several races this year to where Charles and Lewis are fighting each other instead of working together to go chase down a Mercedes driver that's ahead of them. If they want to beat Mercedes, they have to stop fighting each other. I know that's Lewis's MO when you look at Nico Rosberg and George and everybody that he's ever raced with, which, Fernando Alonso, that's what he does. But if they want to beat Mercedes and the constructors, they have to get that under control because they're too far behind now to start fighting each other and costing the team points. And I feel like today is a prime example of that. If they had not done that, they had swapped cars, Lewis probably gets around George, and Lewis finishes on the podium. And on top of that, another thing that saved George was that VSC. I think if that VSC does not come out, Lewis is on George so hard that Lewis gets around George. So George needs to be very, very thankful for that VSC today. Not trying to hate on George, just calling it like I see it. Because Lewis was gradually catching up more and more and more. When the VSC ended, George got a little bit of a jump on Lewis. And there was too much of a gap for Lewis to make up. And that's simply that's how it goes. It's racing. You have safety cars in racing. You can't be mad at the situation. I just think that he needs to be thankful for that VSC. Because if it wasn't for that, I think Lewis overtakes him. And then if Lewis overtakes him, Charles is right there. And I think Charles ends up overtaking him. And then we see George back in P5, which is basically where he's been all season. P5, P6 has been his home. And this podium was very important for his mental, I feel like. He has very much so seemed detached this season. He just looks gone in his eyes. And it seemed like a different George today in that interview after the race. At least in my opinion. I could be completely wrong. And y'all might say otherwise, but he seemed a lot happier at the end of the race. I know he was sitting here saying, we need to pull team orders. We need to keep Kimi behind to fight off Lewis. But then afterwards, he's like, look, he would have passed me on track without the team trying to keep him back because he had the much better tires. It makes sense. He's happy. He's on the podium. He's talking about feeling good to be back on the podium. Again, we're going to Monza. If my memory recalls, Monza is not a bad track for George. They have the rocket ship that is the Mercedes this season. It'll probably be George or Kimi that wins that race. If it's not one of them, it's probably going to be Lewis or Charles. Or Lando. I don't know. Lando's been looking really good. My question is, again, how well will that McLaren handle a high-speed track? We saw him look good in Hungary. We saw him look good today in the Netherlands. But both of those are extremely slow tracks. You're not sitting here pegging the car out the whole time like you will at Monza. I think time will tell there. I think the biggest question next, after can the McLaren hang, is was it a fluke for Fernando Alonso today in the Honda engine, or have they finally figured something out, and Fernando's going to be fighting every week for points? I kind of lean towards yes, and the reason I say that is at Hungary. Well, I guess it kind of goes back to the same thing. He looked really good in Hungary. Again, another slow track. Is it a slow track good car now? Or is he going to look good in Monza? Time will tell. If he looks good at Monza, then Aston Martin might actually become a threat for the lower teams like Williams. I said last weekend, I could see by the end of the season that Aston Martin jumps Williams, and if they do make it around Williams, I could see them jumping Audi. As it stands right now, Aston Martin's got 3 points, Williams has 11 points, and Audi has 16 points. So it's a 13-point swing to get from 10th place to 8th place as a constructor. That's not a lot. That's one good weekend, and everybody else has a bad weekend. You get both Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso higher than, what, P7? If they go P7, P8, that's really pushing the potentially They'll definitely overtake Williams at that point if Williams has a bad weekend, I believe. I could be off on my numbers there. And that's going to put them sniffing at Audi. And if they can get around Audi, they're going to be sniffing Haas because Haas is constantly DNFing. They've given them a terrible car, rather speaking, and Ocon is doing even worse with a bad car. Behrman's doing the best he can, but what can you do when they give you a brick with 4 wheels and tell you to go out there and drive it? So I think at best, we see Aston Martin P7 by the end of the season. I don't think it's realistic to say that they end up in P6 because Alpine has looked really good. They're definitely not ending up P5 because VCarb has looked really good. And when Hadjar comes back, you have both Liam Lawson and Arvid Lindblad in that car. I think even with Yuki in that car, he's been really solid. So I think realistically, we could see them move up to P7. More than likely, it'll be P8, but it'd be very interesting to see. Can Stroll get his head out of his own butt is going to be the big question. And when I say that, obviously the car is better. It's so much better that in qualifying, Fernando Alonso made the comment on this is a good run to practice for Q2. And just stuff didn't fall right. He got knocked out in Q1. Lance Stroll, though, just cannot seem to drive still. I don't know what his deal is, other than it's just Lance Stroll. I don't know what to say. They really need to get rid of Lance Stroll and bring somebody in. What I'd love to see is for Lance Stroll to go, hey, Dad, I'm done racing in F1. I'm going to go to WEC. Or I'm going to go to anything other than F1. Aston Martin's in WEC. They're in a couple different series. He could go race somewhere else. He's mentioned wanted to do rally. Go do that. And give that seat to Yuki Tsunoda. He has ties with Honda. It's very plausible to see him go there. It'd be very interesting. Not saying that it will happen, but it'd be nice to see that. And then you get somebody like Yuki Tsunoda to work with Fernando Alonso, a veteran, and a really strong second driver, even though people want to hate on him. His stats speak for himself. And carried that VCarb team for so long. I could really see that being great. And I just don't see that happening as much as I would like it. Cadillac, I think it's safe to say that they're just going to finish P11. And if they get 1 point, they need to thank their lucky stars for that because that car is basically a walking trash can until the end of the season. I think that they have a lot of ideas. I don't think they have enough time to enact all those ideas. When you have somebody like they have in their backing, they should be able to do something. It's just going to take time. And time is not something you have in the middle of a season. Williams, that car is not going to get any better. I highly doubt it. I think the only reason that James Vowles still has a job is because Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon re-signed with them. If either one of them leaves, I think we see Williams getting a new TP. Because the car is so bad that the only saving grace is you have 2 really good drivers that can help you develop it, and you have one of the best strategical drivers outside of Max Verstappen on your team. So if you lose him and he goes to Audi, that is a huge loss. And so I think Carlos Sainz re-signing with Williams saved James Vowles' job. I think Audi is on the right path. They're another new team, but they've already got 16 points. Hulkenberg was back in the points today. By the grace of whatever you want to say, I don't know how he pulled it off, but he avoided Gabby Bortoleto, which probably saved Bortoleto from a hospital trip, because if he had hit him the way he was spun, it would have been bad. It would have been really, really bad. That would have been, yeah. I don't want to even think about how bad that would have been. I feel like that would have been another Roman Grosjean level accident. And, we've already almost had one of those this year with Franco Colapinto and Behrman in Japan. So we got really lucky, I think, today that, that's all that could be was luck. Can't even say it's skill because Nico Hulkenberg was in a cloud of smoke trying to avoid his teammate You can't see. You just have to go, okay, the track is banked this way. His car was angled this way the last I could see. It's probably rolling down, so let me go left. That's the only rationale that I could think of on how you choose which way to go. And then just hope for the best. Because not only can you not just yank left, you have to make sure there's no cars around you because they're on the first lap, so there's no separation yet. You can't hit the brakes because, again, there's other cars around you. I mean, you can slow down some, but you can't just stop. That was interesting. Now, last week I'd mentioned that I thought that this race was going to be a little more difficult because of the embankment and because Zandvoort is known to have wet races because it rains a lot in the Netherlands. Part of what made that track so solid in the past is in the ground effect era, the way these cars are designed, it sucks the car to the ground. It acts like a suction cup. Well, you take that away, and this year these cars have less downforce because of it. You go on a wet embankment on slicks, that's a recipe for a disaster. And we saw in the same exact corner, and pretty much the same exact spot, Max lost the car, ends up in the wall. Bortoleto loses the car, almost gets T-boned by his teammate. It's not surprising, and I'm kind of glad they're pulling Zandvoort off the calendar after this year. I know there's a lot of people that'll disagree with me, and I like the track, but I just don't know how safe it is in this regulation because of what we saw today with Max and what we saw with Bortoleto. I think in the ground effect era, that would have been fine. I don't think we would have saw that accident there. I don't think in the previous years when you have less horsepower, we would have seen that there. You talk about, the commentators were talking about the fact that, you know, there's an accident where Max had it and we never see one there. And now all of a sudden we do. Well, in the past, there's been less power or you had something sucking the car to the ground to make spinning like that less, I mean, it's still easy, but it's less common with these guys anyways. I'm not trying to take away from their skill because these are fantastic drivers, some of the best in the world. But you just, it's very much so with the way these cars are designed, a lot more easy to see. And we've even heard that comment from some of these drivers so far this year. Now, outside of that, Haas needs to figure out this car and they need to figure it out fast. It's apparent that Audi has figured something out because Bortoleto looked really, really fast in qualifying, and he looked really, really fast in the sprint. And then Hulkenberg looked really, really fast for the Grand Prix. So Audi's figuring it out, which means it's a matter of time before Audi passes Haas. They have 5 points that they have to cover. That's not a lot. That's one race weekend. And Haas not doing anything. It's very possible that Audi passes them. And then again, we have Aston Martin that looks like they're about to be on the hunt for points. If you're Williams, you have to worry a little bit, I think, about this weekend. They were racing hard. They have got to stop racing each other so hard when it doesn't matter. They were like let me see. Let's look at races. They were, where did Sainz finish? Because he finished around where they had that accident at. So they were like P14 and P13 or P14 and P15 and battling like they were fighting for points. Sainz locks up, ends up into the side of Albon, destroys the side of that car. That's a lot of money down the drain that they really don't have because they need to be spending all the money they can on developing this car because it's such a nightmare. But now you're having to fix stuff so that Albon can race the next race because you're racing too hard for positions that don't matter. They're not getting the team points. They're not getting you points. You already have points, so it's not like you have 0 points and it's, ooh, if I get a better place, it's going to put me higher in the driver's standings. It was pointless, and they're still racing that hard. You both re-signed. You're not fighting to keep your seat.
I just don't understand the rationale behind it. I know Sainz has always raced hard. I feel like it's been part of his problem in his career because he caused issues with Charles for racing too hard in certain situations. I understand he's a racer, but you also have to use common sense. And sometimes it doesn't feel like Sainz has that. Albon, on the other hand, does sometimes stick the car where it doesn't belong. So it's on both of them, really, in my opinion. It's just they got to figure this out because Williams does not have the money to keep fixing cars for stupid reasons when they could be using it for development. I think it's nice to see Sergio Perez and a Cadillac that's not in last place of the finishing cars. Granted, Sainz had damage, but still, whatever. He did not finish last place of the finishing cars. Colapinto kind of got a bad break. And I believe Bortoletto also got the same bad break on coming out too fast under red light or leaving with a red light. Something along those lines. It was kind of a really weird penalty that he got to give him a drive-through penalty. I feel like it was kind of unnecessary, but who am I? I'm not part of the FIA. I've just been hypercritical of the FIA all season, and I might be just being hypercritical here. I think the FIA could have given some slack there because apparently it went red, green, red real quick, so who knows there. I think he could have finished in the points if it wasn't for that. I think Gasly showed the heart that Alpine needs, and getting that point, he fought tooth and nail to get around Yuki to get that point. So good on him. And also good on him for that driving that he did to avoid Max. That was just absolutely impressive. Not many people would be able to avoid that. I know a lot of people sitting at home on the couch went, oh, I could probably do that. Oh, well, you're delusional. I'm not saying everybody did that, obviously, but I know there's somebody out there who's like, oh, I could do that. No, you couldn't. They're doing 200 miles an hour, and he avoids a car and debris, and it was genuinely impressive by Pierre Gasly, and the way he did that, and keeping his head down to drive back. Outside of that, I think everything else this weekend was kind of to be expected. Kimi took second. If he's not taking first, he's taking second, so that's not really surprising. George took third. That was a good one. Lewis took fourth. If he's not on the podium, he's usually fourth or fifth. Charles was fifth. He's usually around there if he's not on the podium. Oscar, again, was sixth. I don't understand how Lando's pulling so much performance out of this car, and Oscar just isn't figuring it out. The only thing I can assume is he has not figured out how to use this battery. I know other drivers have talked about that. I know Yuki talked about that was part of the reason he feels like a rookie driving these cars is because of the battery management. I don't know what it is. Maybe Oscar needs to put more time in the sim. He needs to do something to figure this out, though. I think Monza is going to be very telling, though, because like I said, we've had 2 slow tracks, and now we're going to. I mean, it's the Speed King track. It's the track you go to hit top speeds. It has the fastest speed in all of F1 history. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. Let's see. After Monza, we have Spain, then Azerbaijan, which is Baku. It shows Bahrain. That can't be right. Let me look at the schedule. Yeah, I guess Spain, then Azerbaijan. Nope, they did put Bahrain in there. So we're going to try to have Bahrain, apparently, at round 16. I did not see the news on that. That slipped my radar. That'll be interesting. So we have Bahrain, but no Saudi Arabia. Okay, whatever. And then we'll have Singapore, then Texas, then Mexico, then Brazil, Vegas, Qatar, and we'll finish with Abu Dhabi. I think we have to see what's going to happen in Italy. I've said I don't think Lando will have a shot at winning the title. If he does not have a strong Monza, I think that solidifies that. And I know there's going to be a lot of Lando fans that get upset with me about that comment. But it's really questionable on, is this car just functional on slow tracks? In which case, Italy's fast, Spain's pretty fast, Baku is pretty quick. It's just got some sharp turns. Bahrain is it's like a medium track in my opinion. It's not super fast, but it's not super slow either. Singapore, Texas is pretty quick. Mexico is pretty quick, minus the hairpin, obviously. Brazil's going to, I mean, each year it seems like it's a wet race. Vegas is a fast track. Qatar is a track. So if they can't put the car together on a fast track, I think Mercedes and Lando are out of it. They've shown that they can hang on the slow tracks. You got to put something together on the fast tracks. There's too many left on the calendar to not be able to hang on them. So, that's just kind of where I'm at with that. We're going to kind of cut it off there tonight. It's a shorter night. I guess I'll do predictions for Monza. I think Kimi wins. George is on the podium. I don't know where on the podium. Second or third, but I don't know where. And I think Lewis is coming back with vengeance after today and ends up on the podium. And then if George doesn't end on the podium, I think Charles ends up on the podium because let's be honest, Charles and Lewis have had very similar paces all season long. The only reason Charles is further back in the points is because he's had 2 DNFs that were not his fault. Other than that, maybe Lando squeaks in there. You think about like Silverstone, and that's a faster track. And let's look at the results for it real quick. Lando took 4th place. Granted, part of that was because of that caution, but he took 4th place. You look at Austria, another fast track, and he took 7th place. All these faster tracks, Lando's not really in the fight. You look at Barcelona. It's a bit of a slower track, and he's on the podium. You look at Belgium, and he is 4th place. 5th place, sorry. So I don't know that he's going to have the car to put it on a podium in Italy. At Monza, it's possible. I just don't know. I'm sure y'all will let me know in y'all's comments what y'all think on placement. Feel free to do so. And, I hope everybody has a good night. And thank you for watching the podcast. Like I said, if you're watching on TikTok, give us a follow. It'll be much appreciated. We'll be doing more lives on TikTok now, which has been given some issues. But y'all have a good night, and we'll see y'all next week.